Well, time was that if you wanted to access advanced thinking, you'd go to a university. Okay.
Hmm.
If you wanted to access opportunity, maybe you'd go get a degree. But both of those things are being challenged a little bit with things that are going on in the world at the moment. So, Simon, you've been in HE for many years now. What's it actually for?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I think we're having a bit of an existential crisis, I think, in education, or maybe it's just me. Um, but I think generally we are, and I think one thing that's the sort of AI large language model revolution has done is really ask ourselves some very difficult questions about what it is that we do. So that question is a question that I think some of us, at least, have been sort of throwing around a bit more recently. And I think, when you've got access to all of the world's information instantly, at your fingertips, literally, in on your device, and not only that, but you can have, really smart conversations with it. It starts to beg the question, well, what is it that universities do? Where's the value? And actually, students have been asking this question for quite a long time, actually, because it's getting more and more expensive to come to university.
Right.
So I think it's sort of exposed some of the structures that we've had in place for many, many, many years in education generally, but in higher education, which have served a really good purpose. You've got someone who's a very smart professor, and their job is to help facilitate learning, steer learning, to share their knowledge, to share their research, and actually, research is a good point, which we shouldn't ignore. But I think that's been challenged now because anyone can access any of this information at that level at any time they want to. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will. And I think, and I'm also definitely not saying that there's no need for universities anymore or for higher education. But I think what it does is it allows us to think about, well, is there a different model? Are we really optimizing what we can do with young brains or old brains when they come to study with us? So is there a different way of teaching? Is there a different way of assessing that's actually going to be more beneficial for people now that these tools are available to them? Um, it's a long way. It's a sort of very rambling answer. I think, and a lot of people will disagree that it's having any impact at all. I mean, there is one other side to it that I would just add is that coming to university has always been more about just the learning,
Mm.
and it provides all sorts of different opportunities for people to transform themselves. People, it's a transformative experience coming to university. Engage in Hopefully, yes, you will engage in the learning. You'll become a bit more of an expert about something that will hopefully be helpful for you in your career or whatever future you choose to path you choose. But also, it's about all of the other sort of tangible stuff. But just learning about yourself, learning how to communicate with people, learning um, you know, um, a much broader palette of experience anyway. And I think that's still what happens. Now, is that valuable? I think it is. Um, but it's changed. I think the arrival of large language models and artificial intelligence is changing the dynamics, and it's certainly something that universities are thinking very carefully about now, and we're going to have to.
Mm.
Could I just ask a dumb question on that though? So it's called reading for a degree, isn't it? Or it used to be, at least. AI and LLMs have obviously come onto the scene and changed things. But that's not the first time things have changed. I mean, I guess when the internet happened and when Google happened, all of a sudden you didn't have to go into a library anymore and read through lots of books. You could quite quickly search for information and you could have had this untapped resource at your fingertips. So what's the shift? What's the shift that's happening now that's different to what happened then?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as I was talking. I guess it's it's much easier, I think, to access knowledge now. through a large language model. There is okay. When I studied for my degree many years ago, I had to go to the library. I had to go and actually had to go and get books off the shelf, and I had to search the database. So there's friction there, between me needing to learn and do something, and then getting that information and knowledge. And as the internet evolved, nowadays I can access most of the library on my computer. I can access journals, I can search the databases and so on and so forth. But it's still quite an involved process. It's important. It's important to be able to learn how to do those things, to look and research and to find quality resources, and and to sort of to try to reassure yourself that the information that you're searching for and have sought is accurate as it can be, and as like I said, is good quality. But I think the arrival of large language models means that it's much, much easier to just get that information. Now, there is always a question, therefore, that follows, which is, well, how accurate and what's the quality of that information? But these tools are getting better and better and better at doing that. And they will point to the sources, obviously, and you can get much more reassurance than you could do even a year ago with these tools. So I think it's speed of access, it's depth and breadth of information that's just easily available. You can state it in your own terms. You don't need to sort of think, well, what's the question? Where might I find that information? Am I looking in the right places for it? You can just say, this is my topic area. This is the project that I've been set. This is the assignment that I've been set. Help me find as much information as I can about that. And it's just there, and it's instant, So I think it is different. It's certainly different for me. The way I access information now is very different. I do find myself using the university's library resources less and less, because I could more and more trust the sources that I'm getting via the tools that I'm using, the large language models that I'm using. So I think it's just changing. It's changing the nature of how we access information and knowledge. And the other neat thing about it, of course, for me, which I think is a real revolution, is that you can have a discussion about it with the
Yeah.
tool about the information. So no longer am I reading like a really, really difficult paper that's written in the worst type of academic language. I can get that. Then I can go, well, I don't understand this. What on earth is that person saying?
Yeah. I think I remember using it recently when I was reading quite a complex book. I was actually trying to understand how these LLMs worked under the hood, and all the kind of core principles around them. And I was trying to work my way through this physical paper book, and it was saying stuff I just didn't understand. So I screenshotted the page and I fed it into the LLM and told it to explain it to me because I didn't understand it, and it gave me much more context and helped me understand this complex problem, which is kind of its superpower, really, isn't it? It lets you go deep and help you to personalize your learning.
Yeah, it really does. And I have similar experiences all the time now with it. And, for example, I always need an example, and if there's a theoretical piece that I'm reading, and it doesn't quite connect with my thinking, I'll just say, can you just give me a few examples of how this applies or what that really means? And then the examples there help me to really sort of, to make that sort of cognitive connection that I need, to really sort of make that learning start to stick. And over time, you can continue to have dialogues. And I will ask the same question over and over again sometimes. I think, well, actually, I know this. No, I don't. So I'll go back and ask the same question. So, and again, historically, I would have been able to maybe arrange to have a meeting with my tutor to ask questions. Maybe that could happen once a week if I'm lucky, or less so. So
Mm.
again, I've got this super tutor now, which is accessible to me at all times, and I don't need to rely overly on those academic members of staff to sort of do that work for me. Now, there is
That's the crux of the existential crisis you were talking about, though,
well,
isn't it?
this is it, and then there's the spectre of assessment that we, which I'm sure we can get on, but that's the other flip side of this. Assessment has been the way that these tools have impacted assessment, particularly written assessment, traditional written essays, reports, so on and so forth. I mean, that's been the real problem. And it's still the problem that education broadly is struggling with. The notion that you can now, in particular, with the modern versions of the models, you can submit your essay title if you had an essay, and you can go away and do all the research on this, uh, write this 1,500-word essay, fully referenced, write the citation list, make sure it's written in APA 7, not Harvard, whatever you want to do. And it will do that brilliantly now. And of course, some people will say, oh, you can tell when a large language model's written something. Well, you can't really. And if you're only slightly smart, you just say, don't use these common tells that we see appearing all the time in large language model output. I want you to write it in boring academic language, and there's no way of knowing. There's literally no way of knowing, and detectors don't work. So therein lies the problem with assessed work. And so we're all running around panicking, and we have been, probably for a couple of years now, working out how we're going to do this. And different institutions are trying different approaches to try and sort of solve this challenge. But it's quite interesting because we're finding ourselves, having to revert back to probably forms of assessment that we would have sort of left behind some years ago, like exams, because there are issues with exams. Not all disciplines moved away from exams, but certainly if you think about my area, which is creative and cultural industries, if it's not an artifact, it's a written piece of work often. And we don't do many exams. We do some in games and programming and those sort of things, but very few. So we're having to sort of like uncomfortably sort of roll back to some old-fashioned, outmoded, I would say, mechanisms of assessment, like exams, oral assessments, professional conversations, presentations, which in themselves have benefits, and we do incorporate these things normally into our normal pedagogy. But it's just really challenged the whole notion of writing and essays, and so we're running around still trying to work that out.
As you brought it up, I mean, what does the undergrad process look like now in an AI world? I mean, as you say, it's very much, LLM can write your coursework for you. It can do your essay. Does memorization even matter anymore? Open book, bit of a joke now. Like, I mean, what does it look like if you're going into, year one of a degree now as a 18, 19-year-old? What would you expect that to look like?
Well, what I would expect it to look like is different to what it looked like 12 months ago or 2 years ago. What it probably looks like is very much the same as it was at the moment. Now, this is grossly unfair, I think, it's a generalization. I'm just putting this out there. It's a bit of a provocation, but I think, and I can only really speak for my own institution because that's my experience, but I do obviously keep up to speed with what's going on more broadly in the sector. So I know that it's generally applicable, but I don't like to overgeneralize if I can help it. So, but I think we're very slow to respond to this challenge, and some colleagues are grasping the nettle and really sort of thinking about, well, we've got to do something about this. Not only is it an issue of academic integrity, if somebody challenges you about whether students on your course have completed all of their coursework themselves and the machine hasn't done it, then really you need to be able to say, yeah, 100%. There's an integrity issue there. So, and I don't think, hand on heart, that most university courses could say that at the moment, particularly if they're still using what are fairly easily achievable assessments by large language models. And I don't think that's happening broadly. But there are some colleagues that are grasping it. So you will see changes. We're just going through a process here at Portsmouth where we're basically rolling out a new curriculum framework, right? Which is an opportunity for us to look again at the curricula that we're providing to our students. And I think it's good, it's timely, leverage to be able to sort of say, well, look, there are probably some things that we've been doing in some of our courses that have probably been out of date for a little while, so we need to update those anyway. Now we have an opportunity to say, well, what are we really going to do with AI? How are we really going to deal with that? Not in a, and the way I like to look at this is it's just, we shouldn't just be focusing on it as an issue of cheating. It should be seeing where the opportunities are. So we need to be thinking about not only about assessment, we do need to crack that, but we also need to be thinking about content. What are we actually going to be teaching the young people that are coming to study with us, so that they're ready for whatever it is coming,
Yeah,
always happening. We know it's
it
happening.
must be incredibly difficult, I think, for a young person at the moment to know quite a way to jump. I mean, if you're 18, 19, 20, your prefrontal cortex is not quite where you want it to be. It's a very competitive landscape. You know that everyone's got access to tools, and some people are using them in different ways, and some people are being found out, and some people are not. They will have all sorts of internal. I mean, I'm sure I would have done all sorts of internal debates and tensions going on about their own intellectual integrity, and what. So on the one hand, we are encouraging and asking young people to use the tools for their own research, for their learning, to increase the depth of knowledge, to look round the corners, to do all those wonderful things that you used to do with incredible friction when you went to a library, you can now do without the friction. So opportunity. But at the same time, we're saying that's great, but you need to have enough integrity intellectually to when you put that stuff down to be assessed, it's 100% your own work. I mean, that feels, is it even possible to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
it just seems
Yeah.
crazy.
It's really difficult. I think one thing that there's a couple of things there. I mean, one, what I found is that in my experience so far, that students aren't as comfortable using large language models, AI, as we might assume that they would be. Uh, there's quite a lot of pushback, and interestingly, we've had some students who want to set up their own student society around it, so that they can have conversations about it and seek support amongst themselves, as well as from some of my colleagues. But I think you know we need to be very cautious about thinking that because these tools are available, that all students want to cheat and will use them to do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's what you were saying. I
Mm,
think there's a risk, that given we know pressures, all sorts of different things that are impacting um, around deadlines in particular, that if the opportunity is there, then there will be some that will take it, and we know that. So it's much easier now to cheat if you want to, but there's also a lot of concern from young people. I'm finding, they're very, very uncomfortable about the environmental impacts of these tools. They're really uncomfortable about ethical problems with sort of related to them, and so it's interesting because I think sometimes we think that these are the techno generation. They're going to come in and sort of, and in my experience, there's been quite a lot of pushback from some students about that, and so I think in terms of using them, yes, our job is to try to help them to use them in a ethical and critical way, so that they're not just accepting outputs. We're designing teaching that shows them the power of these tools, and we should be integrating them. We're using them on a day-to-day basis. I use it every single day, and it does some of my writing for me, not my published writing, but it does reports and all sorts of things, that I just don't have time to do anymore. Absolutely, yes. Um, but we also need to sort of help young people to sort of get the fundamentals right. We're lucky. We've been through to learn to write. We had to learn to be critical. We had to learn to not accept everything that is in front of us. So we have that layer of sort of, I don't know, I'm just going to call it discernment. We can consider that when we're looking at the outputs of these things, and we can make a decision about whether it's something that we want to just accept or not. But
yeah.
if you're not having that underpinning, then I think there's some real problems there that we sort of that we have to address. So we need to think about how we're going to integrate that learning as part of our courses and as part of our assessment. So can we change the assessment entirely? That means that they're not allowed. What to submit written
Yeah.
work? I don't know. Yeah.
It's quite interesting though what you were saying about what you do use it for and what you don't use it for. But because I get the sense that this is something we're all trying to figure out at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a huge pushback against AI slop on things like social media. And this is a personal bugbear of mine, if I bother to actually engage with social media, which I try not do, but I do tend to use LinkedIn a fair amount. I I want to see the person. I want opinions, and I want their personality,
Mm,
and I can't stand it when people just post something that's so obviously written by AI.
mm,
Because I want to deal with a person, and I want to know about them. But then that's not true when I'm in a different mode of thinking, and like you said, you have to output a report.
mhm.
It's a functional piece of it's a functional document that has to convey some stuff, some stats or some meaning or some output. It's very much serving a purpose, which is different to I want your thoughts as a person kind of works. So I find this fascinating because I think that we're all trying to figure out as a species where it's acceptable to use this and where it isn't.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good point, and yeah, we are desperately trying to figure that out. And you have to use your own assessment of it, don't you? You know, is this am I comfortable with this? Does this sit right with my ethics? And and actually, as you said, does it sit right in terms of the type of communication that I'm trying to achieve? Um, Again, that is actually a critical skill. Making that assessment is something that we are. Maybe we're learning to do it, or maybe it's something that we've already learned to do through previous sort of prior experiences of learning and experience. But I think that's a really important skill. And I guess my point that I made before was if you haven't developed that, if you haven't had opportunities to really sort of think about that, I guess it's some sort of metacognition, really. If you haven't really had an opportunity to think about that, then the risk is that you'll just sort of blindly be throwing all of this stuff out there. So creative writers, we have a creative writing course. They hopefully are going to be very careful about how they use the tools, and you can use it
Mm.
for all sorts of things like helping you with world building and those sort of things. But one would hope that the written piece, the final piece actually comes from the person, and it does have. Yeah, you're right. It does have a different value. It has more of a value when it's a piece that's meant to be created and crafted by a human. It's the same with art. It's the same with photography. It's the same with film. We're doing the same sort of thing with all of these tools. Thinking, right, where is the right use for this? Where does it become so blatant that it's sort of like, well, it doesn't really resonate with me anymore because I know that there has
Right.
a real
Yeah.
person that's done that.
Because the job of the educational system and universities has to be to teach first principles. I always thought that what university gave me more than anything was a hunger to learn and to know that I could learn about anything. You look at kind of our industry in software development, and I did computer science way back when at Portsmouth University, and we would submit code. We would submit programs that we'd written that tested our knowledge of algorithms and loops and problem solving and all that kind of stuff. How on earth do you assess that now when the coding tools we've got, driven by LLMs, can write better code than most people that have been in the job for 10, 15 years?
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
gets to the heart, I think, of the value proposition now, doesn't it? So it's really interesting. I think a lot of this a lot of the way I think about this has been quite instinctive around, where we see the value of a degree as an employer from an employer's perspective. And this is probably varies by discipline, but we would prefer those with a computer science degree to come and work for us than those that didn't, as a general rule. And the reason for that was not because they were better coders when they walked in through the room. They didn't know C sharp inside out. But the fact that they had a computer science degree signaled that they thought a certain way. They had an ability to approach a problem, to be critical thinkers,
Mm,
to come at
From those first principles, yeah.
those first principles exactly. And that wasn't what came out on the piece of paper. That was an assumption, extrapolation that we made that said, okay, if you've been on a coding boot camp, you're probably better at coding than this guy with a computer science degree. But give it a year, that's going to probably flip. And we definitely know that this guy can think the way that we need people to think in the long term.
yeah.
That was a leap that we made.
Mm,
I'm not so sure would be able to make that leap given the current
Mm.
landscape? How do we know that things like judgment, critical thinking, synthesis of idea, the sorts of things you were mentioning just now, how does the degree of the future
Mm.
bring those things out or enable those things within the students that are going through that journey, not just ultimately coming out with a boot camp, I can build an application or whatever the equivalent is. I think
Yeah.
that's the real challenge at the moment about understanding where that value sits.
I think the value of the product, particularly in your world now, is changed. The machine can build the product now. So what you need is what you're saying is and this is what I missed out from the first question. Really, what's the value of going to get a degree nowadays? I mean, it's wider than the discipline. It's the additional skills and capabilities that are hopefully instilled in those people when they're studying, that are valuable and probably will be more valuable as we move forward. So there's been a big discussion recently about, the value of humanities, for example. And a lot of people are saying, well, actually, you know what? Given the world that we're moving into, the humanities brain, the way that humanity is taught and humanities students are learn, and the types of things that they do, that is probably going to be as valuable, if not more valuable, as we move forward in the workforce. So all of these things like critical thinking, judgment, there's a whole list of these things that are we've often called transferable skills, or I think they're going to be probably, they may have always been more important, but I think they're definitely coming to the fore now, where you sort of think, well, you know what, we don't need you to do the product bit anymore, but actually what we really need is people who are innovators and creative thinkers and challengers and really, really good researchers and whatever it might be. There's all of those layers of stuff. So we've known that forever in universities, and that's part of what we do, and it's built into the requirement for higher education learning, if you like. If you're not instilling those capabilities and skills in young people, then what are you doing?
Mm.
So it's incumbent on us, though, now to make sure that we are responding to what's happening with these large language models, for example, and whatever comes next, just to ensure that we're still designing pedagogy and assessment that allows students to demonstrate and develop and demonstrate those skills and capabilities, and that's our job, and we will continue to do that.
Mm.
Um, but I guess it's going to be a bit more difficult for our graduates in some areas in particular, because that pipeline into work is challenged now. So the bottom rung of the ladder, particularly around software development, software engineering, programming, is the most obvious use case at the moment where it's being hit. But there are more. But that's real challenge for them, because you can learn so much and develop so much through your university experience. And often that, of course, can mean work experience, placements, those sort of things that are really I would say, doubly transformative to young people. But you really start to properly put all that together and develop the real skills, I think, when you move into the the
Yeah.
world of work. So, there's a gap that's widening there, between the degree and getting into the job in some areas, that I think very wary of. And we need to respond to that. We need to see what's happening in the world of work, and to ensure that we are trying to work out how we can deliver what the new employers want, in this new
And
world.
how is that trickling down? Are you already seeing a change in the courses that students are applying for, or a change in the numbers? What's the impact right now?
It's very difficult to pick it apart. In my area, my faculty, as I said, creative industries, we see fluctuation anyway in applications for courses, and some are in vogue, some are less so. There's an enormous amount of competition in the sector at the moment. It's very difficult to point to an area and say, this is the reason why you may have had a decline in this subject area.
Mm.
But I think we can start to make some assumptions about whether AI in particular is having an impact. I think we'll see more of an impact over time as the messages get out into schools and colleges and through parents and so on about the impact that this is having on the workforce. But I think there's a lag, but I think we will see an impact, that's for sure, because as much as some of our colleagues don't like it, we are hopefully training young people to move into really good jobs or into jobs. That's part of what universities do. So we need to make sure that we're designing courses that have a pipeline into work. And I do worry that we're not quite, in some areas, we're not quite grasping the nettle and moving quickly enough. And
I guess the thing is, though, university's become such a big industry, hasn't it?
yeah,
I think that there are some courses that are clearly foundational, and if you want to go into certain fields, then you would do well to study these things at university, such like physics or chemistry or whatever, because you really need that grounding in a huge amount of understanding and learning to be anybody that's any good when you go off into the workplace. And I think if I look at my own journey and some of the choices I made, I probably chose a computer science degree as opposed to one of the other flavors that you could do at the time, because I wanted the broadest possible base from which I could have a foundational knowledge that wasn't going to pigeonhole me into any particular box, and I could still go off and do this thing or this thing and this thing and that. I don't think that is going to change. I think you still need the people that are going to be able to create the robots and the new LLMs, right? And they have to
yeah,
really understand
yeah,
computing and software development at a deep level. And you're
mm,
still going to need a lot of software engineers that are just going to.
yeah,
We just don't know what that quite looks like yet,
yeah,
and how they get to the level of competency they need to be able to drive the tools to get the results and deal with all the
yeah,
complications of real world applications. So I don't know. I think it's there's got to be maybe it's just we need to understand the proposition slightly better rather than go to university because you haven't got anything else to do, and you're going to get a job at the end of it or a better job at the end of it, because all these realities are changing now, aren't they? There are less jobs out there.
hmm
There's free education on tap. There's so what is that root? The real reason? And I think it's more like I said, for me, it was sort of lifelong learning and loving to learn and living away from your parents and figuring out how to be an adult was all part of the mix.
yeah, yeah, and it still is. And I think you've made a really good point there. Just using computer science or programming as an example, of course. They do much more than just learning to program in these courses, as you said. And there are still going to be critical, fundamental experiences and knowledge that people are going to need to employ in those industries. I guess the point is that we need to react to whatever's changing in the environment within the courses. I think my concern is about the speed of reaction. And,
Mm.
uh, and I'm not sure that we're great at responding quickly enough to. Well, I mean, who is? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm having a sort of conversation with myself now. I mean, the world is the world is changing so quickly, and the impact on work is going to be quite rapid and significant. And so I don't think anybody really knows, but what we're asking educators to do is to sort of respond to that somehow, so that at least when graduates graduate, that they're sort of ready for whatever the challenges that they're going to face. But you're right. I mean, there's still going to be fundamental stuff. There are things that you won't change. There will be disciplines that won't be impacted so much. We're not going to have the robot healthcare people just yet, hopefully, and those sorts of things where teachers, for example, we're going to need humanity there still to do important work, but it's just going to change. So, I mean, I saw Mustafa Suleyman yesterday saying that in the next 12 to 18 months, that all white collar work will be undertaken by artificial intelligence. Now, I think that's a stretch, but I think there's and he would say that, but there's definitely some truth in that. I mean, the truth is that probably most computer-based knowledge work, some way or other, is going to be impacted by this, and we're going to see a rapid exponential sort of change over the next 2 years or so. So yeah, the difficult thing for education is how you sort of keep up to speed and make sure that what we're doing is delivering for those young people so that they can move into those jobs and be ready and prepared. Yeah.
Is there a conversation going on within institutions about how this value exchange is changing? I mean, so the way I set up kind of the opening gambit was this element of scarcity, which has kind of driven the attraction of universities, both from industry and from individuals. Okay, industry requires research, industry requires specialist knowledge. Where is that specialist knowledge? It's in universities. It's the only place to find it. Individuals need to be skilled up. They need to acquire specialist knowledge to get their degree. Where do you get that? You go to a university to find that. But that value chain is changing to the point, and we'll probably get there across the board, where actually knowledge is abundantly available to anyone at any time to do anything, and even maybe research and having agents go off and do research on specialist fields. That kind of stuff is just available. So, or certainly will be in the not too distant future. So, I mean, you touched on it earlier, the value of these soft skills, the things that many large organizations in particular have often paid lip service to. We hire on values. We can teach you we can teach you the skills. We'll hire on values. Are you a good human? Can you work as a team? How do you think about things? All those things are okay. Yes, they've all been in everyone's brochures. They've been in everyone's recruitment packs. We want people that fit these kind of human profiles. But fundamentally, if you didn't have the specialist knowledge, you weren't going to get in the door, right? It was a filter rather than a goal, a reason that you would hire them. It was a filter between the people that all had this specialism that you required. Those
Mm-hmm.
specialists are going to be ubiquitous, or certainly much more freely available. So is the value exchange now enabling people to be better humans? Does the university have a role to play in that? Is that the kind of conversation that's going on, or am I overplaying it?
I think there's quite a lot there, isn't there? I think it's about what you value, what you need as an employer, right? So you're still going to need people who can apply that knowledge in a smart way, who can do some work with it. It's no good having all of the Encyclopedia Britannica on your desk if you never open it up and you can't do anything with it, and you're just sort of like, well, I've memorized all that and I'm really good at recalling it. It's about application of knowledge, and I think what we do well is provide situations, and that's through teaching and assessment and projects and live projects, working with clients, all of those sort of things that we do really well. We provide scenarios and situations to help people learn how to apply knowledge. And the value is in application of knowledge. It's not in the knowledge itself. And so you're going to need people, we're all going to need people to still to still apply knowledge in smart ways. It's just that the knowledge is available in a different way. And that actually can be risky. We need people to understand how to filter, and then do smart things with it. So research, you started talking about, I mean, research is a really good example. More so than ever, we're going to need spaces, and you can call them universities if you like, where people are given the direction, the expertise, the access to other knowledge, the access to networks, the money, all the things, the equipment, the technology, to be able to do something really, really smart with the knowledge that we have. And so I think at the moment that the institutions that we've got set up are the best we have to do that. At the top end, if you like, at the end of the learning pipeline is the PhD and the doctorates and the amazing research that goes on. Thank God that it does. But also, we're training young people when they start their courses at undergraduate level to be able to sort of transition up to that. So everything that is part of the training is not just about knowledge. It's very much about developing those skills to be able to apply that learning in an environment that's still of value economically, and also, let's not forget, it's not just about making money, it's about sort of personal choice, agency and happiness as well. And that's the other thing that education brings. So it's critical It's just
Right.
changing, and I think we need to work out how we can change so that it's still going to hold that value.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there a couple of times the application of knowledge is potentially the key. Maybe that's always been the key going forward. Maybe that's kind of what we were reflecting on earlier, but that's become crystal, isn't it? Because the knowledge itself is abundant. But how do you apply that? How do you use that moving forward? And we've touched on assessment, and when people are thinking about assessment at universities, cheating comes up a lot. You mentioned the word cheating. How, and your own research as well around LLMs and how to use them in an academic context. Can you just maybe bring some of those things, some of those ideas together?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, that it's very easy to write an essay now with a large language model, and for it to be completely undetectable. I mean, our staff would argue that if you've got a student who suddenly is writing at PhD level when they're a level 4 undergraduate first year, then you might want to have a think about whether they're actually using, whether they've written that piece of material themselves or not. And often we are close to our students. We know, we can see development. It's not like school, obviously, but we often know our students. So if there's a massive leap, there are tells there from our point of view, and we can apply the same rigor that we would have done. This is, in a way, we've had essay farms for years where students can, if they wanted to, they can get somebody else to write their essay for them, but you can normally tell and find out. But anyway, so it is challenging all of that, and that's for sure. So what we're trying to do is, and all universities are going through this, is think about, well, what policies and strategies do we need in place in order to direct staff away from setting those type of assessments that are clearly vulnerable to cheating, or to accidental cheating even. So we are trying to sort of think about how we move away from the traditional models, and as I said, it does become quite difficult, but we can be smart about what we're trying to assess. Some of our areas, particularly in the creative industries, they're not that exposed really. If you're going to be doing a piece of graphic design, or you're building a building, in architecture, you're designing a building, whatever it might be, then you still need to make the thing and design the thing. And we also are really good in the creative industries at sort of showing our working out. Part of an assessment, in a visual field in particular, you always have to sort of also submit your rough work and your notebooks and all those sort of things. So you're showing your development, and actually you get marked and assessed on your development, not just the final shiny artifact, which could be exposed, but actually more often than not, it's not anymore. Students can use the tools to maybe help them generate sort of images that they might feed into their work. But and also some creatives are actually sort of actively using artificially generated images and film on purpose, and sort of surfacing that as something that's been integrated into their work. So not hiding from it, and just saying, look, you can do some really smart and interesting things with this. So we're having to accommodate that into our thinking around assessment and what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, where's the learning happening. The final artifact might not be as important as you showing your working out. So let's try and design a process that allows you to surface your cognitive development, your thinking in concert with the large language model. How have you used the large language model to help develop your position on this? And you somehow design processes that allow us to sort of surface those things.
Mm.
So we're having to work really hard to rethink them if we want to sort of still allow the sort of coursework type thing, and not everybody just jump to exams and oral assessments and those sort of things. But we are also saying that at some point we talk about synchronous and asynchronous assessments in Portsmouth, and a lot of other places do. And it's the asynchronous part, i.e. students can do in their own time, which is the bit that's most at risk. And what we're saying across a lot of our course areas is that there will be a synchronous component to all assessment.
Right.
And that's something that at the moment is part of our guidance. And we're trying to sort of work out how we're going to actually embed that, because you can imagine at scale, that can be quite a difficult thing to do. If you've got, I don't know, 500 students on a module, do you sit them all in an exam hall? So there's a logistical problem with it. And if you choose a different type of assessment, like oral assessment, then you've got to have 500 vivas with students. Then so we have a scale problem as well that we're trying to sort of work out. But that's sort of the way that we're sort of we and actually most universities are sort of thinking about this. Uh,
Yeah.
so from an assessment point of view, there's that, and then there's how we can use these tools actually within the institution to make academics work more efficient. How are we using them in a smart way to free up more time for staff to do different things, research, different types of
Mm.
teaching that might be a bit more less traditional? Can we get rid of the traditional lecture, for example? What can we do? There's different things we can do. So we've got the academic assessment side and the sort of teaching side of it, but we've also got just the day job side of it, and there are lots of areas we can look at, I think, where we can drive efficiency through the other side of it as well, that we're not really sort of touching on at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much
Right.
change in the space right now. There's an awful lot of uncertainty. We haven't touched on funding, and we're not going to touch on funding. Don't worry about that. But there's a lot of ambiguity going on within higher education and education in general. If this all pans out perfectly and everyone gets everything right, what does higher education look like in 10 years' time? What does this become?
Well, maybe it doesn't change at all. Fundamentally, maybe the model will still hold and exactly the right thing that society needs still. It could well be that we'll catch up, that the world of work will settle down a little bit. It's all in flux at the moment. That we'll learn what we need to do. Because the thing about institutions, universities, they're very adaptable. We've had to adapt to all manner of different changes over the years. I remember the conversations around similar to this when the internet arrived. You know, and it was like,
Mm.
oh, what are we going to do? No one's going to want to come to university. They're all going to want to just sort of sit online and learn. And of course, COVID has taught us that isn't the case and it's not the best thing to do. I mean, talk about adaptability. I mean, there you go. I mean, there was another example there where we all had to adapt to changes. And so they're, they're very adaptable institutions, flexive and responsive to all sorts of demands and needs. So I think I'm not panicking about it. There's always the perennial, is this the death of the university conversation that goes around. But I don't think that's going to happen. But I think we will adapt and it will change, and types of things that we teach will change. Maybe the emphasis on the types of learning will change. Maybe the requirement for so much knowledge learning will change, and we'll do more of the development of skills and capabilities that we talked about that are not easily replicated by machines, but still of value to society and employers. So I can see it adapting and changing, and we have to. We're going to have to, because otherwise we will die. We have to, because students will vote with their feet ultimately, and they're paying an enormous amount of money for the privilege now, and so they need to see the value in that. And for a lot of young people, it is about getting a job afterwards, but it's also still about the experience and all of the other things that you were touching on. The great things that I guess the things that have stayed with me, into my adulthood since I was at university. It's not my knowledge of igneous geochemistry and geology that I studied, even though I can still remember some of that stuff. It's the other stuff that's been really valuable to my career. And so we'll still be really good at doing that. And we just have to be a bit reactive and responsive to what's going on in the world of work, so that we are ensuring that we are delivering. And some of those jobs will go. And so some of our courses might go, or they will definitely have to change. That's for sure.
Yeah, interesting. I know we could talk for hours. There is so much stuff that we have not covered today. We'll have to have this conversation again at some point in the near future. But I've got one more question. What is the next thing that we should be talking about now that we haven't talked about already?
Well, gosh, I'm jumping ahead a bit here because in my mind, in my world, because I'm really into the world of AI, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm learning a lot. I'm very excited by it all. I've moved beyond the chatbot now, and I'm moving into the world of agentic computing and Claude coding and all those sort of areas, and clawbots and God knows what. So, I think this is what's going to have most impact on the world of work, and I think we are so far away from that at the moment, about understanding that. It's all very new still, I guess, for a lot of people, but we don't have the infrastructure in most universities to be able to do any of this stuff. We certainly don't have paid access to the right tools and technologies to be able to do it. But I think that's where the innovation is. If I want to change the way that I do my job, if I want to free up more time to do more things with students and less time doing the bureaucratic stuff, then I need to embrace these tools and technologies. And so what I want to really focus on is good use cases and how we can get all of this sort of moving within institutions so that we can really see the benefits of that. And it's not about replacing jobs. It's about freeing up time to do quality work, more research, more teaching, more pastoral support with our students, all of those sort of things. So that's where I think we should be moving, and that's what we should be talking about next.
The agentic opportunity is obviously the area that us at Dutrix are really focused on and really specialising in. So there's going to be lots more coming out on that story
Right.
as time goes on. But you're right, we 100% agree. The agentic future is the unknown. Exactly what that looks like, no one's 100% sure, but
No.
it's definitely the future. It's definitely where
Yeah.
we're going.
Yeah.
Simon, thank you so much for your time. I think you've been a fantastic advocate for universities and higher education today. The
Right.
clarity of thought, that you bring to the conversation, even when you're conversing with yourself, highlights the incredible power of university education and what that brings. So thank you very much. It's been incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Thanks, gents. Really enjoyed it. And sorry for jabbering on so much.